Hello everyone, and here we are for chapters 5 through 7. It's kind of funny, the term, the core of counseling. I think that's a good term. I just think in terms of what is at the heart, what are some of the most basic and important concepts. So we're gonna go through some things to talk about that. Okay. When we look at the Bible and we look at Job, there was one, and the textbook talks about this, there was one of the counselors, the friends who came to counsel him, to talk with him, that really listened and was empathetic. And the others kind of talked at him. Gave advice, condemned him, oh, you must have sinned. So conceptually, I think we have a really good example even right there, and then we'll talk on and off about Jesus and some of the things that he did as well. Every single one of the greats in the Bible had issues. Many of them massive issues. They had divorce, they had fighting amongst their family, they had sexual immorality, they had murder, plotting, conniving, drunkenness. I mean, it's amazing the kinds of things that the people in the Bible experienced that and I know y'all know this, I know y'all are aware of this, but it really just speaks to, I feel like, the human condition and the flesh battle that we all have. And we've had stories of people who were spirit-filled and close to the Lord and went off and did something really crazy: drugs, sex, alcohol, whatever. So I think it's the reason that's important is it gives us perspective, and it gives us compassion for people, as opposed to the Pharisaical attitude that says, oh, I sure am glad I don't do those things. Yeah, but by the grace of God, there go I. And we are capable of amazingly horrific things as humans, and we see that in our world all over the place all the time. Many times the question is asked, is counseling really helpful? And we can probably come up with examples where counseling was not helpful. Well, we can. And when you look at the whys of that, sometimes it was a bad counselor. I knew of a person who went to see a Christian counselor, supposedly a Christian counselor, and it was a female, single, and she was anxious, and he said, you just need to go to a bar and get laid. That'll help. That'll just, you need to relax. You need to enjoy life a little bit. I was like, are you serious? Like, oh my gosh. That just absolutely blew my mind. Even most secular counselors wouldn't give that kind of advice. It was just ridiculous. But anyway, so sometimes it's bad counseling when counseling doesn't work, and sometimes people just aren't ready. I've had many clients where I've said, I don't know if you're ready for counseling. I don't feel like you're doing anything. I mean, you come to the sessions most of the time, but you don't do anything in between. You don't think about the things we talked about. You don't do any homework. You don't work on anything, look at things, try things out. And it's okay. You're just not ready. Maybe it's just a season in life where you're just not ready. So there are reasons when counseling is not successful, but very largely we see success, and we have, oh my goodness, hundreds of thousands of hours of research that would say that counseling is successful. What are the characteristics of a good counselor? And now, again, I know I'm going to say this a million times, and y'all will probably get tired of it, but please, hopefully by now you're not saying, oh, but I'm going to be a pastor. Okay, yes, good. But when you're talking with people, when you're working with people, do you have these characteristics? And some of these people have very naturally. People are just extremely sincere and able to communicate that sincerity. I can be sincere but not be effective at communicating that sincerity, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't count. People are going to be turned off by that and will shut you off. Do you have the ability to understand? Are you able to empathize and put yourself in people's situations and be understanding, as opposed to judgmental or corrective or parental? Can you be understanding? The other one is compassion, and I think about Jesus every time I hear that word. It's just me, but he had an incredible amount of compassion, and he looked at people, and he did not look at people with disgust, and people were a disaster in their circumstances and their situations, and the sin that they were involved in was horrific, and he looked at them with compassion. And we need to be like that. I want to be more like that. And then the last one on this list, I think, is the ability to confront lovingly, sometimes strongly, but appropriately, where you can confront people in ways that they know that you love them and they know that you care about them. And a lot of that has to do with, have you established rapport? Do you have trust? Here's a concept for you. We must earn the right to be heard. Oh, but I'm this person's father, or I'm this person's pastor, or I'm this person's whatever. Okay, but if you really want to be heard, you have to earn the right to be heard. How do you do that? You do that by establishing rapport, by listening. Listen. And a million other things, but y'all get it. So what this describes is a very relational person, and some of you may not see yourself as a very relational person. If not, be aware of that, but learn. I knew a guy that was autistic and brilliant, and he had amazing social skills, and I was like, you're not supposed to have such good social skills. What's the deal? And he said, I just simply learn. I just know. I know when to smile because I've learned it, not because it's innate or natural. I know when to nod. I know I've just observed and learned, and I just do the right things. And I'm like, well, it works. It shows you're good. So that may seem disingenuous, but I think the genuineness in that is I desire to connect with people, and I understand that I need to do these things to connect with people, and I understand that I don't do these things well or do these things naturally, so I'm going to learn. That is a Christ-like attitude and a Christ-like heart, I believe, and very genuine. Okay, when it comes to counseling, here we are learning from a book, and then I say, you can't learn this stuff from a book. It really does take practice. If you were being in school to become a counselor, you would get in class and in internship and in practicum under intense supervision, you would get experience doing these things. If you're not, then you are going to have to self-evaluate a lot. You're going to have to try some of this stuff out that you've learned in the book. Talk about it with other professionals and get some insight. Maybe even have a setting where you can do some role play with somebody. Yes, it's important to learn the concepts, and yes, we learn the concepts from other people and from books, but the skills of counseling really are honed in the actual doing. Take appropriate responsibility for yourself, your level of ability, for your limitations. Here's one thought I was thinking about when I wrote that down, is that there is, when people do well in counseling, we want to take credit. When they do poorly, we want to blame them. So that's what I mean by take appropriate responsibility. Somebody does not do well, I evaluate myself and I evaluate the process, and I say to myself, okay, maybe I've screwed up, maybe there's some things going on, and I can learn from that and grow. I don't have to beat up on myself. It's not the end of the world. But maybe I can look at it and say, I've been there for them, I've connected with them, there's rapport, I've heard them, I've understood them, I've listened to them, I've challenged them, I've worked with them appropriately, and they're not doing well. And so that's their responsibility. They either will do the things we talked about or they won't. If they do, they're going to grow and do better. If they don't, they're not. And I have to be able to go to bed and be at peace with that. At the same time, the other side of that coin is I need to be able to receive feedback and evaluate myself and make changes and grow and do better as well. There are some things in this process of talking with people that come very natural to you. Capitalize on those things. For the things that don't come natural to you, work on them. So you may say, I'm a good communicator. Okay, good. Counseling is a lot about listening. So when you communicate concise. Don't talk too much. And you may say, well, I'm not really a very good listener. Well, learn to be a good listener. I mean, straight up, flat out, that simple. Learn to be a good listener. I was in college, and the president of Asbury College, I went to Asbury College for part of my undergrad. The president at Asbury College spoke at our church one time, and in Dallas, and I talked to him after the service and just said, hey, I wanted to meet you. I'll go to your school. And he's like, oh, great. And it was as though there was nobody else on earth but me for those few moments. There's plenty of people he could have been talking to, maybe would have rather been talking to, but he was able to communicate to me a being with that was just palpable, tangible. It was just amazing. And I walked away stunned. I walked away just thinking, wow, that was powerful. That was amazing. And we need to be that way. Why do people seek counseling? Homework. Anybody identify with the homework thing right now? Yeah, there's a lot of reading in this course, I know. People don't come in for often. Oh no, hold on. Oops. Okay, people don't come in for, sometimes a person will go to their pastor and say, hey, I'm having a hard time understanding this biblical concept, or, that's easy. That's straight up. Cool, let me help you understand that concept. But for the most part, people don't come to counseling because their spiritual doubt, fear, worry, concerns, spiritual growth, guilt over sin, those may be some underlying reasons, but that's not the presenting, this is why I'm here. To work on that. They come for problems in marriage. I heard someone say one time, what kind of problems do married people have? They have marriage problems. Like, oh, that's good. Even if you've got a good marriage, sometimes you have marriage problems. They come to counseling when there's some kind of a crisis in their life. Depression, anxiety, interpersonal concept. I probably should have put intrapersonal as well. Interpersonal between you and me, and just internal stuff going on between what I believe to be right and what I want to do would be kind of an intrapersonal. Behaviors not aligning with my beliefs and values causes internal conflict, and those are intrapersonal conflicts. And school and work kinds of issues. So those are, generally speaking, kind of the reasons that people come to counseling, and obviously there's a million different versions and variations of that. One of the things to be aware of is that that line through my face is really bothering me. Hold on. There we go. Much better. You need to understand that there is a difference between your goals and their goals. Very often huge differences. I'll give you an example. And there could be millions of scenarios that would fit this, but let's say someone comes to you and they start telling you about their marriage, and their marriage is a disaster. And they say maybe even something like, it's looking like we might get a divorce. Well, their goal may be to have you help them deal with the kids and emotionally handle a divorce. And your goal very well may be, as a Christian counselor or as a pastor, for them to restore their marriage. And that has to be reconciled. Because if you're trying to work on one thing and they're trying to work on something else, then that ain't going to work. But in general, what are your goals? You want people to be healthy. What does that mean? What does that look like? With cultural differences, and we'll talk quite a bit about culture in a minute, what looks healthy to you may not be healthy in their culture, and it may not be a morally right and wrong thing. They may be right and you may be right. So there needs to be sensitivity to that. Goals is a place where there's a high potential for a lot of clash between client and counselor. Spirit, soul, and body. What do we have goals for each of those? Do we have goals for only one of those? Where do you emphasize primarily when you're looking at what needs work? Is it all spiritual? If so, I hope you find balance, because that's out of balance. And Jesus was very concerned about our soul, our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, our body, our physical self. There's an awful lot in the Bible about other things other than spiritual. So we want to have balance there, but we also want to find out what they want to focus on, and we need to respect that. If all you want to do is focus on spiritual, and all they want to do is focus on a relationship conflict and the back and forth between them and a spouse, then you are doing them a disservice by not joining them and meeting them with where they're at and joining them in what they want to work on now. But they need spiritual help. Yes, they do. But they're not going to get it if you ram it down their throats. So you have to wait and be patient and look for appropriate opportunity to go there with somebody. You start with where they want to start, and then you bring in the spiritual as time goes by. You really want to clarify your goals at the very beginning. Sometimes pastors will say, I'm going to meet with you. I only meet with people 2 times or 3 times, and that's perfectly acceptable. Beyond that, and part of what we will do is evaluate whether you need counseling or not. And beyond that, then I'll refer you to a counselor. But you need to be good during those 2 or 3 visits. Sometimes they'll just meet once, depending on their setup. I really encourage pastors and counselors to be good friends, to have good relationships. If you're a pastor, you need to go find a Christian counselor and build a relationship with them. A few would probably be good. Invite them to your pastoral networking support group meetings that are all across the United States, all kinds of meetings like that. When I'm talking to counselors, I'm saying the same thing to them. You need to find pastors and befriend them and encourage them and strengthen them and bless them and be there as a referral source for them. I had a pastor call me up one time, and he said, hey, I just had a guy come to me because his wife caught him sexually abusing their 1-year-old. And he's sat in my office for 3 hours and bawled and repented and do I have to turn this in? I said, do you want to go to jail? And he's like, no. I said, then you have to turn it in. And he did, and it was appropriate that he did. And it was also weird because I knew this family. I was like, oh my gosh, I know this guy. It's crazy. Okay, that I don't know if that was off. Sorry. Okay, so clarify goals at the beginning. Literally, formally, okay, let's jot some things down. I encourage them to write. You write them down, I'll write them down. Let's come up with, what are your goals for being here? What do you want to accomplish? Remembering that there may be some that have to do with time constraints. In other words, we're going to meet 2 times, so one of the goals is, what do we want to figure out in these 2 times? What do we want to accomplish? And sometimes that's whether or not we're going to refer you to counseling, or whether or not this is all you need. looking at the actual relationship between you and the person that you are working with, it is, other than Jesus, you are, and the relationship is the absolute most important factor in the room. It's the most important tool in counseling. Not any technique or skill, or nothing is more important than the relationship. Most people are afraid of counseling. Most people are a little weirded out about it when they first come. They don't know, even coming to see their pastor, maybe not as much so, but very often. So you've got to be gentle. You've got to be understanding of that. You may even ask them, so how do you feel about coming to counseling? How do you feel about coming and talking with me? And I wouldn't ask them that like right up front, but 5 or 10 minutes into it maybe. But if you are able to build rapport and trust, and relate and hear and understand, and really this is much, especially early on, about just listening. I want to say to people all the time, shut up and listen. Just shut up and listen. That's huge. Just listen. No agenda, not figuring out what you're going to do, what you're going to give them, what you're going to tell them. I have ranted about, and you will hear this on probably every single one of my video lectures, counseling is not about giving advice. Most people don't even want advice. I see people give advice all the time. I am challenging you to remove the word advice from your vocabulary, including your writing, during this course. Just for this course. Just get rid of it. People say, I give good advice. Oh, that's awful. No, I don't want to hear that. That's horrible. And you may not understand that at all. You may think I'm like being really weird, but you just got to trust me on this one. We do not give advice. In our discussion boards frequently, and one of you said something to the effect of, the best advice I have is, and I'm thinking, he didn't ask for your advice. Nobody asked for your advice, so don't give it unless, and when someone asks you for your advice, we'll get to that as to how to handle it. I never is a big word, but I do not give advice. I just don't. Help people get to where they need to get, help them think about the things they need to think about, I help them focus on where they need to focus on, but I don't give advice. All right, so that's a little side thing. That's a soapbox of mine, in case you couldn't tell. Are you good at connecting with people? And some of you are like, ugh, yeah, not really. And some of you think you're great at connecting people, and you're not, which is a really sad place to be. Get feedback. If you're not sure, ask somebody that you know and trust. How good am I connecting with people? And I need you to be honest with me, and if I get upset, I'll get over it and still love you. But are you good at connecting with people? A therapeutic climate is a million things. It's you, it's your warmth, it's your courtesy, it's a bottle of water, it's all kinds of things that you do. But a lot of that, what the book talks about here too, is think about your actual physical environment. Pastors oftentimes will sit behind their desk and talk to someone on the other side of their desk. That is absolutely taboo. Please don't ever do that. If you're used to doing that, please stop. You need to have an area in your office, chairs that you can just sit and face each other. Sitting around like a round table, especially if it's a family, sometimes that's okay, because that can be inviting. But generally speaking, we're trying to keep barriers away from between the two of us. We want things to be fairly comfortable. We want there to be a sense that the walls are not paper thin and everybody can hear everything I say in the next room. And if that's the case, that I'm doing something, I have a noise box or a background music, something that will help cancel out some of that noise, and maybe even have that conversation with them. And this helps with confidentiality. You want comfortable furniture. I think of a picture like a family room, love seat and a nice chair, those kinds of things in the counseling environment. If it's a pastor's office, it's usually a little bit different setup, but you want to have some comfortable chairs that you can sit in. They don't have to be ginormous, huge, lazy boys, but you want something relatively comfortable. The more the better. And I've said this a million times, the relationship is very core to the whole process. Solar skills, face the person squarely, open posture, lean forward, eye contact, and relax. Those are the kinds of things you're going to use, especially up front. They will help communicate warmth and genuineness and empathy. If you just do those things, the person walks away feeling like they're heard and understood, and that you're warm. Well, your warmth is not necessarily by doing those things. Your warmth comes from a little bit deeper than that. If you don't really care, it may be a day to not talk to people. And there will be days when you don't care. Like warmth? Yeah, well, I don't give a rip. Well, okay. But you want to be warm and genuine with people. The empathy is so hugely important. There's a ton of research on empathy. We could talk about it all day. But that ability to get in someone else's shoes, how good are you at that? To feel what they feel, to imagine what it would feel like to have had something like whatever they're going through, even though you may not have gone through the exact same thing. Really rely on the Holy Spirit. Ask the Lord to flow through you, to speak through you, to give you words and mannerisms and body language that help. You want to maintain structure. I'm going to come back to challenge. You want to maintain structure. There's a big difference between chatting and being therapeutic. So there's times that you get started with a client and it's just chit chat, kind of normal. Hey, how's the weather? Blah blah blah. It's raining a lot. How's it going? What, whatever. Just chit chat. But that can go on sometimes a little too long. So you want to steer it back to, okay, what are we here to talk about? What's going on in your life this week, or where are we at on our goals, or whatever that might be. The net analogy is, I think of our relationship like a net, and if you're building a net and it's not finished yet, then you put a lot of weight on it, it will break because it's not ready for weight. So you don't challenge, because that's the weight on the relationship, until your net is strong enough. Sometimes you don't have time for that, and you just have to rely on the Holy Spirit and do the best you can with it. But challenging can be damaging without relationship. So if you don't have the relationship, the net is not strong enough yet, then hold off. And if you're not sure, that probably means that you should then hold off. All right. There's this term called attending skills. Goes along with solar skills, but a little more detail than that. So listening skills, and the book talks about this pretty extensively, and I do want you to look at the book and go more into depth with it than just what I'm going to cover here. But basically, I think of it as there's several terms. One is active listening. One is reflecting. How good are you at reflecting back? We reflect content, which is the most basic level of reflection. We reflect emotion, and we reflect in our reflections. Sometimes we do interpretations and get into that is the most complex and the most deep type of reflection. Probably the biggest barrier to listening is distractedness, and one of the greatest distractions is trying to figure out what you're going to say in response to them, out of fear that you're not going to have anything. But you have the Holy Spirit, so you need to listen and trust that the Holy Spirit will give you words to say when the time comes. And He will. And he just always does. And if I don't have anything to say, then I don't say anything. I mean, I may just give a prompt to keep them going, or maybe ask a question, but you don't have to say something. There's a pressure for that, a feeling of pressure to say something. Sometimes that's not necessary. Okay, so then there is responding skills. So how do you respond after you've listened to what they've said? These are the 5 basic ways of responding. So a lead is you're literally just leading them into something. And it may be because of something you saw or something you didn't see or something that you think might be missing. But it leads them down the path to keep them telling their story and to pull out the more important aspects of their story. Reflecting, we already talked about reflecting. Summarizing. You summarize when you're moving from one major topic to another. It communicates that you understand. You summarize at the end of a session. You may summarize somewhere in the middle to transition from one topic to another. Sorry. Encouraging them to continue to talk, encouraging them in general. Encouragement's a huge thing, obviously, and then interpreting, which we already touched on. Questioning. The thing about questioning is that it's easy to over-question, and you want to really protect against over-questioning. If you question too much, it has their feeling of being interrogated really easily, and you don't want that. Sometimes it feels intrusive. People ask a lot of questions. It can feel even condemning or judgmental. So you want to be careful about what you ask and the way you ask it, the demeanor in which you ask it, your tone. Tone of voice, remember, is huge in all of this too, in establishing rapport. Your body language and your tone of voice is huge. We ask questions for facts. We ask questions for information. We ask questions to prod them along. I don't like the word prod, but you know what I'm saying, to keep them going. And they can be really short and simple. Can almost be like a statement, like, tell me more about your mom. Tell me more about that specific aspect of y'all's relationship. It's something like that. And that's really not a question, sort of, almost. But anyway, those are the kinds of things we're talking about. Challenging. Man, I have said some things to clients that I thought for sure that they would never come back, and that would be the end of that. And they did. They were. It was helpful. That's usually because I was led by the Holy Spirit and not because I thought it was a good idea to challenge. You're going to find yourself on a continuum of confrontational and non-confrontational, and you're talking with people. You may already know where you're at on that. The older I've gotten, the more confrontational I've gotten. Blunt. It's like I don't have time to mess around with, like, what are we here for? Why are we not working? Because we're not working. So let's start working, or let's not do this. I mean, I would literally say that to someone if at session 3 or 4 or 5. You know, it's like I just tend to be fairly blunt as I've gotten older. You can actually do some teaching. I oftentimes go to the board. I always have a whiteboard in my office and markers, and go to the board and lay out some concepts for them. It's really helpful. Drawings are good and fun. Triangles and matching things up and putting lists on one side and the other, and all kinds of things you can do. But that can be a part of those are a whole set of skills in and of themselves. Filtering, looking for deeper meaning and for inconsistencies. And you point them out. You ask. You look at deeper meaning, and you say, "Oh, what does that mean to you? Is there more to that? Does that mean something to you, or is it just a thing, or what?" And so oftentimes they'll go deeper with you. Inconsistencies. You tell me you want to have a good relationship with your wife, and then you go and yell and scream and cuss and throw a fit and throw things and break things, which tells me you want to drive her away. So which is it? Those are examples of inconsistencies. You tell me you believe in the Bible and believe in sexual purity and waiting till you get married to have sex, but you're having sex, so maybe you really don't believe that. Which is it? That can be painful, but it's good for people, obviously, to really be able to hone in on what it is that they really believe. The first one is the textbook. The second one is mine. It's from another textbook. It's what I've taught: initial stages, working stages, and then termination phase, which is not just all of a sudden kind of a deal. But if you're working with someone long term, 6 to 8 weeks or more, you're going to start building rapport and connecting, and you're going to begin to explore the problem, the working stages. Then you're going to start doing stuff, planning, working it. Having homework assignments, goals, things they're going to try and do differently. And then you're going to wrap it up. Termination is an interesting word. It's like, wow, is somebody going to end up dead on the other side of that? I mean, it's terminate. It's like, I'm okay with the word. I wouldn't use it. I don't use it with clients, but professionally I use it. The textbook, he moved away from that word and called it stopping instead, which that's fine. Like Dr. Collins, why? But whatever. Not a biggie. Okay. Next section is legal and ethical and moral issues. This is actually the next chapter. I didn't put the chapter up there. Sorry. I think it's chapter 6. I'm pretty sure. The reason worldview is important when we talk about legal and ethical and moral issues is the vast differences in your worldview and somebody else's worldview, and someone who you might think would have a very similar worldview that you do, but they don't. The challenge is that there's a clash there in values, and it can cause legal and ethical and moral issues. Many Christians and many in the Christian worldview have a tendency to interpret people's problems as purely spiritual. I'm very, very much not in that camp. I believe in the spiritual, obviously. I believe that spiritual is important. I believe that it's got to be dealt with, but I don't believe it's the only problem that people have. There's a tendency, well, if people were spiritually strong, they'd be physically healthy and they'd be emotionally healthy, and it would take care of the soul. And so really, we're right back to all you have to do is take care of the spiritual and everything else will be okay. Well, if you're strongly in that position, we'll have to agree to disagree and move on. And that takes me back to the spirit, soul, and body, and we talk about the balance between those three. So there's part of my worldview. There you go. And we may have just had a worldview clash. I don't know. I wish we were interacting right now. Then we would know. That would have been clever if I would have done that on purpose, created that worldview clash scenario. But it just kind of organically happened. How do you know what's right and wrong? What do you base that on? That comes from your worldview. For us, it comes from biblical. I'll oftentimes tell people, look, when I'm talking about healthy and unhealthy and right and wrong, I'm talking about from a biblical Christian point of view. Tell that to secular people as well as to Christians. And they may not like that, but at least they know where we're coming from. What do you believe the cause of symptoms are? These are all worldview things that are relevant when you're working with people. There's more than that, but that's a pretty good overview. Worldviews in general address five major things. What do we believe about God, the universe, its origin, chaos, purpose, supernatural, knowledge? How do we get it? Does man create knowledge separate from God? Is it there? You have evolution. You have creationism. You have God as the source. Bible infallibility of the Bible. All those issues under knowledge. What do we believe about humans? Are they basically good? Are they basically bad? Free will, determinism, those kinds of things. Spirit, soul, how do we change? All that kind of stuff is under worldview. And number 5 is right and wrong. How is it determined? I mean, you've got huge issues in the world. Some of you may wonder what in the world. Surely you've heard of LGBT, GLBT, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transvestite, Q is queer, U is undecided, and I is something else. I don't remember what the I's are. There's even a longer one than this. Facebook says they identify 50 different terms for self-identification when it comes to gender and sexuality. Man, we live in a complicated world. Let me tell you, this right here is going to create some serious problems for the church in the future unless things turn around. Pastors being thrown in jail for speaking out against homosexuality, that kind of stuff. Counselors as well. My answer to that is be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. Never back down and never compromise. Maybe squirm your way out of a situation if you can on answering the question of do you believe homosexuality is a sin in front of a group of homosexuals. But love them lots. Be kind. If it comes to a confrontation and you have to answer that question, answer it. And be honest and realize that you may, at some point down the road, you may be putting your job on the line, and somewhere down the future, you may be putting, if you're a professional counselor, you may be putting your counseling license on the line, and if you are a pastor, you may be putting your ability to pastor on the line, or at least your credentials. So, or jail time. That'll put the hurt on your ministry. Well, it's jail ministry, right? You just transition into jail ministry at that point. Laws are set up to protect consumers. Licenses are important. There's nothing magical about, the person has a license, that means they're a good counselor. No, but it does mean that they have jumped through some hoops and they have gotten some training. It keeps Joe Blow idiot from just buying a sign and saying, I'm a counselor, and hanging it on their door and start taking people's money and abusing them. So that's what the licensure process is all about. There's all kinds of laws when it comes to suicidal stuff and homicidal issues. So, for example, if someone is suicidal or homicidal and you don't intervene and they kill themselves, you can be held liable, legally liable, not to mention morally. Sexual assault and harassment. It is amazing how many pastors and counselors have sex with the people that they're working with. Part of the problem, not only is it immoral, hello, but part of the problem is there's a power imbalance, especially the younger the person is or the sicker emotionally the person is. The person has counselors and pastors are viewed as people of authority. And if someone is hurting, they are viewing themselves as the lesser and the weaker, and so does society. It may or may not be true. It doesn't matter when it comes to being in a court of law. They're the weak, you're the strong, and you took advantage of them. That you just don't want, even when it comes, and we'll probably talk about this more in the future, but when it comes to touch, just be really careful. That sexually abused person is touched by you, hugged, reach over and put your hand on their shoulder, put your hand on their hand, and that's kind of intimate kind of stuff. That could be misinterpreted very easily as a sexual advancement. And if you physically touch them and it's interpreted as sexual advancement, you touched them and it was sexual, that's sexual assault. There's different levels of that, legal terms, at least in the state of Texas. So just be really, really, really careful. There's some seriously jacked up people out there. And you can think, man, we've got rapport, we're doing good, I'm comfortable with them, they're comfortable with me, and you touch them and all bets are off. So I'm not 100% no-touch policy, but man, if you get a check in your spirit, do not touch them. When they start crying, do not touch them. Let them cry. They need to cry. Touching tends to stop the crying. Let them cry. That's kind of a different subject, but nonetheless. All right. Technology and use of technology is huge. we're talking about Skype, internet, counseling, even phone. Confidentiality is a big concern because most things are not encrypted well enough to protect confidentiality. And so if you're going to do online counseling with people, you need to make sure you have the correct, do the research and get the type of interactive program that is encrypted enough to meet HIPAA standards. As counselors, documentation is, I mean, you can lose your license over not documenting. For pastors, documentation is just wise, because if there's a problem, you can go back and refer. This is the day we met. This is the time we met. These are the things we talked about. You're not going to remember a year later or 2 years later, necessarily. You might, but you know, it's documentation is very protective. It protects you and them, and it's very important. Don't have to give just massive amounts of detail in the documentation, but you need enough to where you can know what you're talking about. You know, I remember my young adult, like early college years, like ethics, just do the right thing. That's all you need to know, right? It's just that simple. Like, come on. It is a little more complicated than that. Where we have problems is when there's a conflict of values. What's important to you and what's important to the people you're working with are very different, and oftentimes that's the case. Culture comes in there. There's ethical codes for all professions, and these things are talked about in great length. Confidentiality. I don't think confidentiality is drilled into most pastoral training programs as heavily as it is counselor programs, but I would encourage you to take a very high standard when it comes to confidentiality. My wife doesn't even know who my clients are, or anything they tell me. And if someone comes to me at church that's not a client and shares something with me, that is between me and them, period. I had someone do that one time, and then like the next week they came up to talk to me more about it, and my wife was standing right there, and he was starting to talk to me about it, and he looked at her and said, you know what we're talking about? He's filled you in, right? She's like, no, he didn't share anything with me that people share with him in confidence. And they were like, oh, cool. That very much gave them a sense of peace. My wife's a CPA. I don't know. She does people's taxes. She knows how much people make. Some of these people are our friends. I have no idea. Right? It's not my business. It's not appropriate. So confidentiality we take to a pretty high extreme, and for us it can be a licensing and sometimes a legal issue. Transference and countertransference. Transference is when the client is reacting to you because you remind them of somebody. You may be their father or their mother or their brother or their sister or boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse or ex-spouse or ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, or it's like it can get real interesting, and that's not real threatening. That's something that actually you can work with and can be a powerful tool to help. Countertransference is when you're reacting to them, and that's dangerous. That you will do damage, you will hurt them, and so you need to work through that. Countertransference is just the opposite. So they're reminding you of that person that you don't like, or that person that made you mad, or your countertransference there remind you of somebody that you were very attracted to romantically at one point. You find yourself very attracted to them, and I hope nobody said to themselves, "Oh, that would never happen to me." That, woof, man, it can happen to anybody. And if your guard is down by saying, "Oh, that'll never happen to me," then you're gonna run smack into a wall. Don't let your guard down in that area. Referrals, again, for pastors, a lot of times that is just, here you go,
I'm going to see you a couple of times and I'm referring you to a client, I encourage you to give them 3 names. That's always important. In the counseling world, we can get in trouble with our licensing board for referring a homosexual couple because based on religion, based on our religious beliefs. We used to be able to do that. In 2014, the American Counseling Association, which is kind of like the big deal, put out a new code of ethics, and they address that very specifically. The Dr. Kevorkian, kill you when you're terminally ill or kill you when you're old. Oftentimes counselors help people and families work through that. And if you get that client, you can't refer them out either. Based on I'm uncomfortable with this. It is unethical. Oh, you can, but it's unethical. You can get in trouble for it. You can do anything you want and lose your license sometimes. You probably wouldn't lose your license over that. You would probably have to go to cultural sensitivity training and be put on probation. So maybe do some community service. I mean, it could be a pretty serious deal. Each institutions have their own policies depending on where you are, including churches, and so you want to make sure you're familiar with those. You want to make sure that the institutional policies are in line with your local laws and ethical and moral standards of your established values for that institution. Sorry, I kind of got lost there, but hopefully y'all got that. All right, so sexual misconduct and touch, we've already talked about that, and then the power imbalance, we touched on that already too. Okay, last chapter. We just have a few more slides. Y'all bear with me. Whew, this is a long one. Cultural awareness is really, if you're going to do good with other cultures, you're going to have to know yourself. What do you believe? And some people, I don't have culture. I'm just a regular Caucasian American. Like, oh my gosh, are you serious? There's North and South differences in terms of hospitality, friendliness, warmth, greeting people in public places. There's the guns and no guns. There's liberal and conservative. There's all of that is culture. There's the foods you eat, the music you listen to, the things you like, the places you go, the way you entertain, the way you get entertained, on and on and on and on. And then, so there are cultural things that are within societies, maybe even neighborhoods. And then there are cultural things that are very unique to your own specific family. Not that nobody else has them, but, like for us, we are a more the merrier family. So if we have a party and 100 people show up, we're thrilled. If kids we're doing something and the kids are like, oh, can I bring a friend? Oh, can I bring a friend too? Yeah, bring 2 or 3. That's a cultural thing, right? So that's just who we are. So and there's people that are not that way, and that's okay. And that's part of my point is just understanding and knowing that these cultural aspects, we're going to be very different. There are times that there are clients that I would tell about a hunting trip and killing an animal, and other clients that I would not. And I've actually made that mistake where I'm talking about hunting, and they're just looking at me like, you kill animals? Like, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I do. How about that? It's just, wow. My 12-year-old daughter, her first dove hunting trip, I told her when the dove is shot, oftentimes it hits the ground and it's still alive, and you have to go break its neck. And I said, and you have to break its neck. And she did. And it was wonderful. She was like, Daddy, it was such an accomplishment. It was so cool. I was like, yeah, that's good, baby. I mean, it's just, and some people would be like, oh my gosh, you made your 12-year-old girl do that? That's horrible. Yeah, but culturally, you got to understand, they have played in the guts of a dead deer, looking for and identifying all the parts. My one daughter said, I want to see inside the lung of a deer, and I pulled out my knife and handed it to her and said, go for it. And she cut it up and looked at it, and very interesting. It was like having a little science uh, lesson right then and there. And she was talking about naming all these parts. She was in biology at the time, and she was naming all these parts. I was like, wow, that's pretty good, girl. That's awesome. So that I would not have that conversation in front of some of my clients. In fact, I wouldn't have that conversation in front of any of my clients unless I knew for sure that they were there. Now, you may say, well, what about us? You just offended, one or two or three of us. This is an educational setting, and we're attempting to learn. And I use that as an example. And if you're overly offended, my bets are you'll get over it. I love you guys. All right. So cultural awareness. Be aware of what you are, and the kinds of who you are, and what you believe, and the kinds of things that are offensive to others. We are in this hyper offense. I'm offended. That's just like the trump card. Oh, don't offend me. Oh, okay, sorry, whatever. I mean, it's like, come on. I'm not saying we need to run around and just be offensive, but the very fact that I am a middle-aged white male Christian, gun-owning, Bible-believing Christian is offensive to people. And I'm like, you know what? You can get over yourself, because, sorry, it's just ridiculous. All right. 5 concepts for multicultural competencies. Again, starting with your own culture, know that, and don't say, I don't have any biases. I don't have any biases or any prejudices. Yeah, you do. And if you think you don't, then you haven't been exposed to enough people yet, because there are people out there and cultures out there that will weird you out. You may not ever run into them, or you may not run into them very often. But understand and know that your initial response, human tendency, is going to be repulsed by something that somebody does. That's really just who they are and their culture. Study the people that you're working with and the people in your church. If you've got all African American church and Hispanics show up, study those dynamics. Know the culture of different people. If you've got, you may have a massively culturally diverse church, which is fairly rare, but they are out there. Understand their cultures, all of them. It can be overwhelming, but study. Build a relationship with some of them and ask them to help you with that. You can do or say one thing wrong at times, and it just be such a cultural faux pas that you're done. They're going to leave your church. Like, wow. Or they won't come back for any more counseling or whatever the setting is. Let's see. Look at how do they view the world? What do they value? What are their biases? What's important to them? Understand the concept of cultural adaptation. It's this whole cultural shock, and then this learning process of trying to learn a new culture. Remembering that if you have a person in your church who is from another country other than America, or from up north, which is kind of like another country, then I hope you Northerners are like, hey, then understand that they're going to be going through this. And if you find yourself in another setting, understand this cultural adaptation process. And then number 5, make changes based on what's sitting in front of you, who is sitting in front of you. Sorry, not what, but who. Sometimes you don't know how to change, or what to change, or what that looks like. Henceforth, talk to other professionals, study, learn their culture, but do definitely modify what you're doing in order to fit people. Significant issues in general when it comes to people's culture is marriage, family, gender. How do they treat each other? Who has the power balances? What are the roles? Gender differences, gender identity, gender stereotypes, norms. The difference between a norm and a stereotype. A norm is what people do. A stereotype is using a gender behavior and speaking it to someone in such a way that's derogatory or putting them down or trying to keep them from making progress in life. There we go. Like, oh, that's women's work. That is stereotyping. Statistics say that women do 70% compared to men doing 30% of washing dishes. That's not a stereotype. That's a cultural norm. That's a statistical fact. Maybe I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that was off the top of my head. But yeah, you get the difference, right? Okay. How do people perceive themselves? How are they taught to believe about themselves, highly or lowly, accurately, balanced, whatever? Cultural identity, and oftentimes there's confusion with cultural identity. People may have parents from different cultures. They may, their parents are immigrants from a country. They're born in this country, so I'm not really Indian. I'm not really American. My grandparents are hardcore Indian culture. My parents are pretty Indian culture, and I'm running around in this American culture, not really fully understanding how to fit in. Just an example. I actually had a friend share that with me, but it's an example. How do people view God and religion? And boy, you're going to get some wacko stuff there nowadays more than ever. Values, what's important to people. Control, responsibility. Who takes responsibility for what? How much control do people believe they have over their lives? How much control do they have over each other? Those kinds of things. Time. Some cultures, like, okay, my house, dinner, 6 o'clock, and man, they may show up at 8. I'd be cleaning up and done, and like, okay, guess they're not coming. But just time, it's just different for different cultures. Communication styles, this is direct and indirect, and confrontational and non-confrontational. Indirect communication styles, someone may say that they say things really vague. They won't confront. If there's conflict, they won't confront it directly. It's really kind of interesting. India has a lot of that as well. How much emotion do people express? Many Asian cultures do not express much emotion at all. They view it as inappropriate or weak, and other people are extremely expressive emotionally. So that's part of their culture. And then what is that particular culture in the individual or the individual family? What is their attitude towards counseling? Some people think counseling is horrible and evil and or worthless or waste of time. Like, why would you see a counselor? You just talk it out with your family or your pastor. Oh, okay. So that's something to know about. Here's another one that's not on the list, but I want to touch on it, and that is individualistic versus, what is the word? Individualistic versus collectivistic. Thank you. Whew. Collectivistic. So collectivistic societies are decisions are made based on how it affects the family, and that weighs heavily. I'll give you a quick example. So, how am I going to do college? Am I going to stay at home and help my parents and my grandparents? And the decision ends up being that I'm going to do it online and stay home because the family needs me. And that's a collectivistic kind of a thing. Whereas non-collectivistic and individualistic, would, and the family would include it. The family would say, well, yeah, bye, see you, go, we got this. And the kid would go off to college. If you're talking to someone that comes from a collectivistic culture and you don't ask them about your family, they are offended. So always ask people about their family. If someone comes to counseling alone, don't assume that they are from an individualistic society. They may just be going ahead to check it out first. talk, ask them, so does your family know you're here? And how's your family feel about it? And how important is your family to you? And if the answer is no to all of the above, then okay. I mean, that's information for you, but at least you asked. Oh, looky there. Hallelujah. That was it. All right, guys. Goodbye. God bless. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.